Okay, Haley. So this week's case is one of the most famous American murder mysteries in all of American history. It's super exciting. It's the first one that was ever broadcast on TV, the trial. So it was very influential, very famous, very excited to tell you all about the Menendez Brothers murder mystery this week on Murder Mysteries with Haley and Mary Margret.
Let's do this thing. Before we get started, make sure you like, follow, subscribe to keep up with some of our content. That way you're notified and in the loop.
Yes, and make sure you comment and like if you
Woo!
like what we're up to. It helps boost us and let us know to keep making these. Okay, so our story begins at 11:47 p.m. on a Saturday night in August 1989. Lyle Menendez calls 911 sobbing to the dispatcher.
What's the problem? What's the problem?
Someone killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Someone killed my parents.
What? Who? Are they still there?
Yes.
The people...
No.
Were they shot?
Hey, man, dude.
Were they shot?
Yes.
They were shot?
Yes.
102, 102, response 722 North Elmore.
What happened? Hey, stay there, man. What happened? We have units around. What happened? Who shot who? I don't hear anything. I just came home. You came home and found who shot? My mom and dad.
You know if they're still in the house, the people that did the shooting.
Get away from him. Okay, hang on. Let me talk to Eric. Who is the person that was shot? My mom and my dad. Your mom and dad? My mom and my dad. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, we're on our way over there with the ambulance.
Beverly Hills police arrive at 722 North Elm Drive and enter the Mediterranean-style mansion. In the den, on the floor next to the coffee table, they find the bloody bodies of Kitty and Jose Menendez. 46-year-old Jose Menendez had been shot 6 times, including a fatal shot in the back of his head. And Kitty Menendez, 48, was shot 10 times, including once in the face in her cheek. Their sons, Lyle, 21, and Eric, 18, were shocked and distraught, and they tell officers that after a night out going to see a movie, they came home and they found the driveway gate to their parents' home unlocked and the front door to the mansion was open. Police found no signs of forced entry or an attempted burglary, and the brutal nature of the killings pointed to a mob hit, and police started to look for possible motives in the shootings of Jose Menendez by looking into his complicated business affairs. What are your first impressions about this crime? It's pretty brutal, right?
Yeah, that's definitely, I kind of see what they mean when they're saying that it's, kind of a brutal nature and that maybe it's a mob hit. You said it was in their houses in Beverly Hills?
Beverly Hills. So our scene is taking place at the end of the 80s in
Okay.
Beverly Hills mansion.
In a Mediterranean style house, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm picturing my dream home right now, but it's fine.
Yeah, you might have to clean up a little bit before you take this house. So let's talk about Jose Menendez, shall we? One of the first victim. Jose fled Cuba in 1952 when he was 15 years old by himself without his family. Eventually, he attended Southern Illinois University, where he met Mary Louise, or Kitty, Anderson, and he and Kitty get married in 1963, where they moved to New York City. He ends up getting an accounting degree from Queens College, later getting a job at Hertz, and working his way up that corporate ladder, where he can then get a job at RCA Records. He becomes a big corporate executive at RCA Records in New York City. Very big recording studio, very impressive. He signs big acts at the time like Duran Duran and the Eurythmics and Menudo. You fans of them, Haley? Any of them?
Oh yeah, Duran Duran. I know my parents like them. I know a little bit about
That's
them.
huge.
I have a Eurythmics record though, I will say.
Okay. So Kitty and Jose raised their two sons, Lyle, who was born in 1968, and Eric, who was born 2 years later in 1970. They all lived together in a huge house in Princeton, New Jersey. So Kitty is known as a very loving, caring mother. She's a devoted homemaker, and she's involved in a lot of charity work in their community. So kind of your classic wealthy housewife. The boys also went to a very fancy private high school and enjoyed playing sports. And their dad, Jose, was really insistent that they pick one sport to excel in. So the brothers chose tennis. Both of them played tennis. And though their dad hadn't played much tennis himself, he read everything he could and studied a lot of videotapes of matches so that he would be able to offer critiques and pointers to his sons. He would regularly call in with the boys' coaches for in-depth discussions and coaching strategies, as well as checking in on his sons' progress. By the time they were 12 and 9, Eric and Lyle were already accomplished junior tennis players. As well as her other housewifely duties, Kitty is also managing their schedules and taking them to practice. Pretty normal life. Pretty normal, very wealthy American life. What do you think about his dad? Like,
very controlled.
Very controlling.
It feels like his dad is like, they're just like another Duran Duran or like another Eurythmics. Like at first, when you started saying it, I was kind of like, okay, that's really thoughtful that he's like taking the time out to talk to their coaches, taking the time out to watch them play. Because I'm sure he's a really busy father, as well as like businessman. But then I was kind of like, it feels like he's like micromanaging a little bit, because I always know, like when I was playing sports, I liked when my parents got involved to an extent, and they definitely like pushed the envelope a little bit, and you got to let your kids figure it out on their own sometimes.
Yeah, is this just another act to manage for him? That's a good question. Glad.
Yeah.
Hold on to that thought. Okay, so later in 1987, Jose moves the whole family to Los Angeles. Moved from the music industry to the movie industry. So in 1987, Jose moved the whole family to Los Angeles to take a big new job at Carol Co., which is a movie studio and distributor that specialized in action films. So they made all the Rambo movies, for example. He served on Carol Co.'s board with Sylvester Stallone, so they're really rubbing shoulders with some big-time celebrities now. And Jose, who he experienced a lot of success at every step in his career, but he also had a reputation for being a really controlling taskmaster who wasn't afraid to humiliate his coworkers in meetings, and he actually said he enjoyed firing people. So you did pick up on something with the controlling aspect.
Yeah, this guy just seems like textbook, like rich, weak, but needs control to feel strong male. Yeah. Money doesn't buy strength. Sorry.
Very true. Money does not make you invincible. So do you think he's a little obsessive?
Yeah. I mean, if he's like that, I think still what's the bigger red flag is the way that he's treating or not treating the kids. I feel like I don't want to make assumptions, but I think, to have an executive that's been in music and now in TV, like you don't get there from being nice. I feel like if you're in LA, like you have stepped on some, you've stepped on some heads to get there. So I don't necessarily, I don't want to jump the gun here and say that this guy's a bad dude, but just seeing that he moved his family from New York City to LA, I feel like that's never really a good tell of character.
So the police are looking into his activities at work to see if any of these maybe disgruntled coworkers or employees maybe would be involved in his murder. And a few days after the murders, Lyle, the oldest son, hires bodyguards to protect him and his brother, fearing that they might also be killed by the same people who killed their parents. And they had their parents' memorial service back in Princeton, New Jersey. And Lyle and Eric were reported to have spoken very movingly. Lyle read a letter from his father that he had once written to him, filled with love and pride for his sons. And Eric said, "We are the prototypes of my father," Eric said. He wanted us to be exactly like him. So, for Lyle and Eric, as we kind of already touched on, yeah, that might be a little bit telling. So, like we talked about before, money is no object for these people. They just have almost an incomprehensible level of wealth. They immediately shared the $400,000 insurance payout after their parents' deaths, and they were the sole beneficiaries of their parents' entire estate, which was valued at about $14 million.
Whew.
Yeah,
That's sweet.
Gotta take a pause after that. Police started seeing some activity from the boys that made them a little bit suspicious, and they started to look into the boys' criminal history as well. So Lyle and Eric had taken part in a string of home burglaries in Beverly Hills, and right before Lyle was supposed to head off to his freshman year at Princeton. So when they got caught, Jose decided that Eric should take the fall for both of the boys because he was still a minor, to keep Lyle's acceptance intact. So Eric took the fall for his older brother. He avoided jail time, but he still had to do some court-ordered therapy.
I think it was a pretty smart move, if I'm being honest. I have a few thoughts. First of all, I love this not trend, but where you hear of just insanely rich people getting bored and then doing things like committing felonies like burglaries. It's just funny to me that these kids are just bouncing around Beverly Hills and just decide that they're just going to start stealing shit. That's so, it honestly to me is a cry for help almost. I'd be interested in if they were doing it to get some attention from their dad.
It's
but
definitely
I don't think,
a sign
I think
that
it's a good idea
something's going on.
Yeah, these kids are weird. I think that the court-ordered therapy though probably was a good thing. Maybe he had a chance to talk about his dad and the control he has on his life.
Maybe. So while Eric, who is in his court-ordered therapy, he's completing that while Lyle goes off to Princeton, but later he was suspended after only one term because he cheated in Psych 101. So he's already out of there, but his father insisted that he keeps living at Princeton to keep up appearances, so he doesn't have to admit to his business colleagues that Lyle had been suspended.
This is so cliche, I feel. Classic that this kid goes to school and gets suspended in the first semester. Come on. And classic that the dad has him live in Princeton just to keep up the image. That's taking that shit seriously.
Very
That's
technical.
an image.
They really care about their appearances.
Yeah.
This family. So
yes,
as
clearly
the media's focus is beginning to fade away from the Menendez case, while police are continuing to get reports about the lifestyle that the brothers are enjoying in the wake of their parents' murders. Each of the brothers bought $15,000 Rolexes before the funeral. They bought adjoining condos in Marina del Rey. They went to a lot of expensive restaurants and went on trips to the Caribbean and to London. They spent thousands of dollars on designer clothes and shoes. They bought courtside tickets to concerts and sporting events, and you can actually see them sitting courtside at an NBA game. Lyle bought a Porsche Carrera for $60,000, a $131,000 Princeton townhouse, Chuck's Spring Street Cafe, which is a buffalo wing restaurant in Princeton, for $550,000 with plans to turn it into a franchise. And then Eric hired a $50,000 full-time pro tennis coach. He made a $40,000 investment with a rock promotion business. And he purchased a 1989 Jeep Wrangler. So within 6 months, the brothers spent an estimated $700,000. Do you think they were just continuing their lifestyle that they're used to? Are they just excited to be out from their parents' thumb? Are they partying away the grief?
I don't know. First of all, it seems like Lyle went a lot crazier than Eric did. So I don't know
Lyle's
if
running
that's...
up a tab.
Yeah, Lyle went nuts, but also your parents just died, so there's no way you should be out here hiring a tennis coach. Maybe you should hire like a life coach and figure out, how to grieve with what's happening.
People
Pretty
don't always
unbelievable.
do.
I would like.
People don't always do like logical things in grief, but also this did start to make the police suspicious because they're like,
True.
this is not what
Everyone
we
grieves
expect people
differently.
to act like after their parents have been murdered.
Yeah, and I totally understand because it's like you come into all of this money and your parents would want you to be happy, but doesn't really sound like his dad was, the type to let these kids just run free, and this looks like them running free with, no bounds they're spending. I'd be interested in what the dad was like with like their allowance and like everything like that, if he was like a pretty frugal guy or, any of those things.
So the police are really frustrated because they see all of this money spending as maybe getting the money from the inheritance was the motive, and maybe the brothers are actually who we should be trying to arrest. So a big break comes in the case from the younger brother Eric's guilty conscience. So he's still seeing his court-ordered therapist, Dr. Oziel. He started resuming his therapy sessions after the murder, and Lyle also visited the therapist's office. Eventually, over time, Eric confesses to killing their parents in tape-recorded sessions. He does not know that they're tape-recorded. Dr. Oziel wants to have recordings in case they do something to him. So Oziel tells his mistress about the confessions. He and the mistress have a big falling out. The therapist's mistress ends up reporting to the police that both of the brothers have confessed to Oziel. And then the police sees Oziel's files and tapes. So they killed their parents.
That's juicy. It's so crazy that like the mistress has a role in this, of not the father or the kid or the son's. Like this is like the therapist mistress. So she just came out of left field and just took him down. Respect, honestly, even though that's very illegal of the doctor in the first place and very disrespectful. And I don't condone therapists doing that in any way, shape, or form. But if these kids are just like, I mean, I guess they're not so much kids anymore. If they're just sitting there telling like their therapist, you should probably tell the police, do the right thing. So I'm not too mad about it, but go off, Queen.
Okay, so now police have enough information to arrest them. So on March 8th, 1990, Lyle is arrested. At the time, actually, Eric is in a tennis tournament in Israel. So it takes a few days for him to get back to the States, but when he gets back to Los Angeles, Eric turns himself in. And both of the brothers are held without bail, and they're separated from each other. So now we're going to talk about what he described to Dr. Oziel about killing his parents. In their recorded sessions with Oziel, the brothers say that they drove to San Diego 2 days before the murders and purchased a pair of Mossman 12-gauge shotguns using fake IDs. They returned to Beverly Hills on Saturday evening and waited for their parents to settle in after dinner. Jose and Kitty were watching a movie, having dessert in the den of their Beverly Hills mansion, when Eric and Lyle entered the den carrying the shotguns. Eric said, "Lyle was to shoot my dad, and I was supposed to shoot my mother. We went into the room, and Lyle pointed the gun and shot him. Then he went over and shot him in the head." Eric continued, "I was unable to shoot my mom, and then she tried to get away. Lyle shot her too. My mom was on the ground, slowly crawling and moaning. Lyle then ran to his car, reloaded, and then fired the fatal shot to her face." Eric added, "After it looked like my mother was dead, I shot her twice with my gun." So this was brutal. Absolutely brutal.
What stood out to me here is Eric is essentially saying he didn't kill anyone. He just wants to make that clear, because he makes sure to say, once I saw that she was dead, that's when I shot her. So to me, it's coming off like Eric is basically screwing his brother over.
Honestly, that could be part of his guilt, too. He never, just a forewarning, they never turn on each other. They always, from until the end, are like, we killed our parents together. But yeah, that could be part of his guilty conscience, even for his brother. Like, I said I would do it, and then I didn't, and then he had to. But that is, like, unequivocally shocking and horrible and just so unbelievably violent.
Horrible.
And just to be watching TV and eating
And like your own
dessert,
mother.
and then your sons walk in with guns, like that is terrifying.
Yeah.
Like, where does it go from here? It seems pretty open and shut. They've been arrested. They admitted to it. Why do you think that this story was such a sensation?
Money. I think also, like, no one wants to accept that, like, two young, attractive boys that were on a somewhat decent path, that were trying to get an education. No one wants to believe that anyone would do that to their own parents. If I was part of their community, I would maybe, and if I was maybe as rich as they were, I would just be like, oh God, no, like, there's no way that happened. It had to be someone that was like, you know, not as well off, that just came in and was jealous of their money. But you never think that your own kids are going to come for your wealth someday after you literally give them everything. And it's like the ultimate betrayal, especially when there's money.
Stay tuned, Haley. We'll see why this is such a big deal. So, Dr. Oziel tells investigators that Lyle threatened to harm him if he let anyone know that he confessed. So, even though California law does protect confidentiality, it does make exceptions when there's a threat of violence towards the therapist. So, the court rules that the therapist tapes, including the confession, were admissible as evidence because Lyle had threatened Oziel. So appeals over the tapes last for 2 years until the California Supreme Court finally rules that most of them are admissible as evidence, not all of them. So it takes 2 years for the trial to even start because they're having this fight over the tapes. Then in December of 1992, a grand jury finally issues indictment charges charging the brothers with the murder of both of their parents. The prosecution announces that because of the brutal nature of the murders and the evidence of the planning beforehand with going to buy the guns and getting the fake IDs, that they're going to seek the death penalty if the brothers are convicted. The prosecution says they're going to prove that the brothers killed their parents out of hatred and greed for their $14 million estate, which they stood to inherit. Meanwhile, everyone in the extended Menendez family, including all other potential heirs to the estate and executors, agree that the money from the estate will be used to pay for the trial. So their defense money is coming from their parents' money. So that is another big juicy detail of this trial.
The irony.
The irony. Their defense lawyer is Leslie Abramson, who is a famous defense attorney known for her take no prisoners tactic, and she is hired as their lead counsel. A little bit about Abramson. According to LA Times, she spent her working life building a reputation as a 4'11", fire-eating, mud-slinging, nuclear-strength pain in the legal butt. I love that.
Hell yeah. That, I think I want that on my tombstone. Maybe I should pursue law school again.
Maybe. Okay, so right from the beginning, Abramson concedes that her clients killed their parents. There's no denying that. They never tried to deny that. The whole conversation about this story and why it's such a big deal is the why. Why would you kill your parents in such a brutal way? The prosecution says it's money, but the defense says their true motive was not money. So this is a quote from Abramson, their defense attorney. It was in the secrets that Eric had spent most of his life concealing. For 12 years, between the ages of 6 and 18, my client, Eric Menendez, was sexually molested by his father. Abramson said that she would show the brothers acted out of fear of their lives after a lifetime of abuse at the hands of their parents. So we're going to get into some pretty heavy stuff here. So at a press conference, the prosecutor, Pamela Bosnich, tells reporters, this is a defense trial. The defense has conceded all the prosecution charges. They have to prove that the boys were in immense danger from their parents, and they have to prove sexual molestation. Two very hard things to prove. So what they're trying to do is not get out of being convicted of murder. They know that. They're trying to change it to a manslaughter charge under a different provision for abuse victims, that after a lifetime of abuse, it's called the battered woman syndrome, battered woman defense. Like if a woman has spent her entire marriage being abused by her husband, she ends up snapping and killing him, maybe that mitigates a reduced sentence. So that's kind of what they're going for here.
Yeah.
And the prosecution is going full murder, conviction, death penalty.
That makes sense. If true, that's evidently very devastating. It's definitely not the turn I expected the story to take. You know, having a man of such power and dominance in the entertainment industry, you know, doing this to his, not even only just like little children, his own son, I feel like is unfortunately a trend that we often see is people in positions of power using their power to intimidate others. So if true, that's very upsetting, but unfortunately I feel like that is, you know, something that we often see in history and in the media.
So a lot of people were thinking, are they just saying this now because they're being accused of murder and they want to reduce sentence, or is this something that has truly happened?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So obviously people are going to think, why now? Not necessarily that that's my belief, but we will get into the evidence and why this became such a sensation. So the Menendez trial became such a big deal because court TV was beginning in 1993. It's the first court case, murder case, to ever be broadcast to the whole country. And right at the beginning, Abramson sets the tone for the trial when she comes out of the gate swinging at Jose Menendez and the defense opening statement. She says, "This, after all, was a man who pulled Eric's hair when forcing this 11-year-old to orally copulate him, who slapped him repeatedly when the child cried after his father ejaculated in his mouth for the first time, and who forcibly sodomized him." So accounts of abuse by both parents became abuse, also not sexual abuse in terms of Kitty, but abuse in terms of there's psychological abuse in the house, there's physical as well as sexual abuse. So a lot of things going on. So there are a lot of witness testimony from relatives, friends, tennis coaches, and expert witnesses. Kitty was kind of portrayed as a desperate, drunken, drugged, suicidal woman who harassed her husband's mistresses and who was a dangerous driver. So she was kind of dragged through the mud a little bit as well. So here's some stories about Kitty. Lyle was still wetting his bed at the age of 14, which is a big warning sign when kids are wetting the bed past the appropriate age.
Yeah.
When he would do this, his parents would shame him by putting the soaking wet, smelly sheets on the breakfast table in front of everyone, forcing him to look at it. Kitty would tell her sons that she hated them and she would threaten to poison them. And Kitty knew all along that her husband was molesting Eric and did nothing about it. This is what Eric claims. He says he found out that his mother knew the whole time and did nothing about it. As Abramson claimed, up until the age of 15, Eric's mother would periodically make her son submit to physical inspections of his genitals, which she called checking you out. This pattern included forceful acts of oral copulation, sodomy, rape, and intentional infliction of pain by the use of foreign objects upon Eric's person. Jose Menendez's obvious purpose was to use his child's body to satisfy his lust. So this is all before the brothers are speaking. They're just describing the most horrible sexual and physical and mental abuse at the hands of their parents. And they have relatives coming that are saying, I saw this one thing, but no one ever talked to each other and put things together and like put a stop to it. But there was tons of relatives. Okay, and then it was the brothers' turn to take the stand.
Before almost all the times with the sex, I would say to myself, I'm not going to let this happen. I'm going to stop it. As soon as he comes into my room, I'm going to fight him. I'm going to jump on him. I imagined myself on a ledge, jumping down on him, all kinds of things to stop the sex. And whenever he came into the room, I just crumbled and I couldn't do it.
He told me that we should keep it just between us and that if I ever told anyone, he would kill me. and this is what Eric said. We would be in the bathroom. He would put me on his knees. He would guide me in my movements, and I would have oral sex with him. So neither of them knew about each other's abuse, which is important. Because he would tell the boys that he would threaten to kill them if they told anyone. A very memorable part of Lyle's recollections in his testimony was that he once remembered Kitty ripped off his toupee during an argument 5 days before the murder. And his father had forced him to wear a toupee when he started balding a lot younger. And his brother didn't even know he wore a toupee until his mother ripped it off in an argument 5 days before the murder. So that's to show that the stuff is still going on, even though the boys are 18 and 21. They're adults. So according to Abramson, this incident with the toupee led Eric to, they had a heart-to-heart, and it led Eric to telling his older brother what their father had been doing to him for the first time.
Did you think that having his hairpiece torn off in front of you was a thing that would embarrass him?
Yes. No, I knew he was very embarrassed, and I wanted to tell him that there wasn't a reason to be.
That it wasn't going to change your relationship?
No.
And then did you start talking about something that you were feeling badly about?
Yes.
He had never told his brother before. And this, Abramson told the jury that this led Lyle to come to his brother's aid by confronting their father and telling him to stop molesting Eric, which he was still doing, even though Eric's 18. And according to Lyle, Jose Menendez responded, "He is my son, and I will do what I want with him."
Yeah, that's if I was in that courtroom, I would have been like audibly like having to hold myself back from gasping. Especially because of the painted picture of them just being this, any other just wealthy family that's, hasn't made. So it's just goes to show you again, behind closed doors.
Never know.
That is
And
very
remember
upsetting.
that all of this is being broadcast to the whole country. And obviously they're up there talking about extremely difficult subjects, and they're crying, and they're like almost hyperventilating. They're being very emotional.
And how did it start?
Just started with, after sports practices, he would massage me, and we would have these talks, and he would show me, and he would fondle me, and he would ask me to do the same with him, and I would touch him, and we would undress.
Where would this take place?
In my bedroom.
And how often would this happen?
Like 2 or 3 times a week.
And for how long did this happen?
Not too long. It began to change.
When did it begin to change?
I'm not sure exactly at what time, but almost close to when I was 7.
And how did it change?
Just became more involved.
What do you mean more involved?
We would be in the bathroom, and he would put me on my knees, and he would guide me, all my movements, and I would have oral sex with him.
Did you want to do this? At some point, did he do some other things to you?
Lyle and Eric's weepy descriptions of their father's sexual abuse was satirized on a Saturday Night Live skit, and you can hear the studio audience just laughing and laughing at the sight of John Malkovich dressed as Lyle, wearing a bright blue sweater on the stand, and him and the SNL cast members just pretending to cry and like just making fun of their display of emotion. So this was just a big joke to all of the country. Seeing these two handsome young men, they're wearing brightly colored sweaters, which a lot of people thought the defense wanted them to wear that so they would seem more wholesome and vulnerable. And instead, a lot of people saw that as they're spoiled rich boys who thought they could get away with killing their parents from
Preppy
murder.
D-bags.
And here they are fake crying on the stand, blah, blah, blah. So it became a huge joke just to the whole country.
Did you tell your mom?
Yes.
What did you say to your mom?
I told her to tell Dad to leave me alone. And he keeps touching me.
What did your mom say?
She told me to stop it. And that I was exaggerating. And that my dad has to punish me when I do things wrong. And she told me that he loved me.
Later in the trial, to prove this kind of rich kid narrative that the prosecution believes, the prosecutor asked Lyle, "What you did was you killed your parents and then began spending their money, right?" "Well, that's something that happened," Lyle said, "but I don't think characterizing it in that way is putting it in the right context." "Well, why did you need to buy a Rolex watch 4 days after your parents were killed?" Bosnick asked. "I didn't need to. You wanted to," she said. That you can see some of trying to remind the jury what tax bracket these kids come from and the way they were spending that.
Yeah.
Almost fell off my stool.
Mm-hmm.
In their closing argument, the prosecution wanted to know why Eric was suddenly so comfortable talking about the abuse when he was supposedly so ashamed before that he didn't tell anyone, including his brother and his therapist. But we now know in 2023 world that the overwhelming majority of childhood abuse victims do not come forward at all. So, wrapping up the first trial, a total of 101 witnesses testified as cameras showed a huge national daily TV audience what was happening in the court every day for almost 5 months. Just constant gavel to gavel recording and reporting of this trial. By the end of the trial, the Menendez family tragedy had developed into kind of a cynical national joke, and people were ridiculing the brothers' emotional testimony and their sweaters and Lyle's toupee. And all of this, kind of the joke of it all, overshadowed any discussions about the actual effects of childhood sexual abuse or what the impact of the media was having on the trial, having it all be so scrutinized constantly by everyone. Finally, we're about to have a discussion.
Yeah, I mean,
we have to get to this. So after 19 days of deliberations, the jury, 19 days of deliberating, the jury finally tells the judge that they're hopelessly deadlocked. They're deadlocked. So on January 13th, 1994, the Superior Court Judge Stanley Weisberg declares a mistrial, and the prosecution says it will try the case again.
I see why there's a retrial, because I would need a retrial. I don't know. I mean, when you said over 100 witnesses, like that feels like it should be enough to make a decision. But when you're dealing with something that's so sensitive and so personal to someone, you can't be like, oh, like you were saying, why did this person not come forward, when it's no one's place to question why a victim doesn't come forward. That's like entirely up to them and, comes at their own time. So I feel like if I was to try to say that, tell these guys that they were never sexually assaulted or sexually molested, because in the case that it was true, it would cause more of a detrimental impact to them and their lives than, anything else could. So I don't know. I think, if it was a tactic to get people on their side, that's horrible, but maybe giving them the benefit of the doubt in this situation, I just wouldn't really question a victim and survivor's way of going about telling their story, especially if after they killed their parents, because now they don't have to, they don't have them around anymore, so it's like the weight is lifted. Why do you think they killed him in the first place?
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, to their point, that's like, why didn't you tell anyone? Because if we believe that the abuse is true and that he was under threat of his life because his father said, I will kill you, it actually makes a lot of sense that he wouldn't talk about it until after the fact.
Yeah, like he knows what his father's capable of. Like, that's...
And at the end of the day, though, they did murder their parents. Like, we can have sympathy for them and what they went through, but there are so many people who have been abused by their family members who don't kill their parents. So that's an important thing to remember. But we can still have sympathy for them and the way that the media treated them. Both of those things can be true.
Yes. Yeah.
Think about where we were in the 90s with masculinity, and it's right after the AIDS crisis, so there's an added taboo with homosexuality, and childhood sexual abuse is not something that was talked about very prevalently, especially within the family. So it was just a lot of things that were maybe a little overwhelming for Americans at large to digest for the first time. With all the media coverage, things got a little crazy. So now, at the second trial, which starts in October of 1995, there's no media at this trial. And the retrial also lasts 5 months. All cameras are banned from the courtroom entirely. And, importantly, the O.J. Simpson trial had started in the same LA County courthouse. So these are two huge, nationally famous and historically important cases happening in the same courthouse. So crazy.
That's wild.
To pay for the retrial, this time they sold the family mansion, and now Leslie Abramson, she's back as their lead defense. She's regularly referred to as Eric's surrogate mother, which made people a little bit uncomfortable because he killed his actual mother.
Yeah.
And instead of being in brightly colored sweaters, this time the boys are in suits and ties, looking very serious. Vanity Fair columnist Dominic Dunn notes at the time the change in the brothers. He says their rich boy swaggers, struts, and smirks have been erased. They are now scowling, gloomy, glum. They are, after all, fighting for their lives. So
that's a great point.
This time Eric testifies. He still testifies at length about the abuse, but Lyle does not testify in the retrial at all. And many of the witnesses in the family who had witnessed previous abuse, it was deemed as inconsequential, so they did not testify again in this trial. So the prosecution's really pushing the same rich boy narrative, and the abuse narrative that made the deadlock happen has become a little bit harder for the defense to prove. So lawyers wrap up 8 days of closing arguments before the jury, with the prosecution calling the defense claim of abuse a hoax, and the defense attorneys are pleading with the jury to be lenient on the boys. There are several weeks of deliberation, and the jury finally finds that Eric and Lyle are guilty of 2 counts each of first-degree murder and 1 count each of conspiracy to commit murder.
Wow.
And the jury only had 2 sentencing options: life in prison without the possibility of parole, or death by execution. So during the pre-sentencing phase, the jury heard testimony from an expert witness for the defense. And during cross-examination, the witness reveals that Abramson had instructed him to delete some notes that he had made after interviewing Eric shortly after the murders. He deleted that Eric had discussed what it would be like to live without our parents, and that he had admitted that the brothers made up a story that their father's homosexual lover had warned them that their parents planned to kill them. That was a lie. So Abramson fires back saying that
Yeah.
her goal to delete the notes, it was because they're prejudicial and irrelevant. But the judge then bars Abramson from arguing any further before the jury. So she spent 5 years defending Eric and Lyle, and she's forced there to sit and squirm in her chair for days as the prosecution is pushing for the death penalty. I cannot imagine how mad that would make me.
I'd have to wear a muzzle.
Yeah.
We both would.
I would have to wear a muzzle as well. I'd be barking from the sidelines. So while the jury is deliberating, the brothers are interviewed by Barbara Walters on ABC News for a special interview. Walters calls them spoiled, and Eric protested, "I'm just a normal kid." To which I respond, "You are not, sir. You are very, very, very wealthy."
Yeah, clearly
At
not.
least we not forget. You live in Beverly Hills Mansion. And then Walters responds to that, "I'm just a normal kid." "Eric, you're a normal kid who killed your parents." And then he looked up at her and said, "I know." At least they're aware. On July 2nd, 1996, Lyle and Eric Menendez were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, each receiving 2 life terms consecutively, one for their father and one for their mother. And they were sent to 2 different prisons. From 1996 to 2018, they were not allowed to see each other. They were at different prisons. And then one was transferred, and in 2018, they were reunited, and both are currently being held at Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego. So that is the story and the trial. But our story today does not end there. We've got.
It doesn't.
No, it doesn't. We've got to talk a little bit about some of this impact, and then I know you're gonna have a lot of thoughts. Looking at this case, I had so many things. I was like, I cannot wait to talk to Haley about this. So let's do a little recap at the end. So the 2 shotguns were never recovered, and like we said, the Menendez mansion was sold in auction for $1.3 million to pay for the defense. Okay, so each brother actually got married in prison to women who were not incarcerated. So they got married to free women. Eric married his pen pal, Tammy Sockman, in 1999. And Lyle married Anna Erickson, a former model, who later divorced him because she found out he had been writing to other women in prison. Even when your man is in prison, people still find a way to cheat on you. And I just think
these guys like managed to find a way to still be slimy douchebags while in prison.
Yeah, very true.
That's great.
And he later married another woman, Rebecca Sneed, who is a journalist turned attorney, and they got married in 2003. Lyle is now 55 and Eric is 52. And the brothers counsel other inmates who have suffered sexual abuse, and Eric leads multiple self-help groups in prison. So this case played a huge role in repopularizing true crime in the 90s. There were books and documentaries and TV shows made about the case, and it brought up a lot of issues and discussions that maybe the country hadn't talked about that much, like family dynamics and abuse, wealth and privilege, which we always love talking about as Americans, to be honest, mental health and the justice system. And it also raised a lot of questions about how much abuse plays into murder cases and how the court can handle cases that have a lot of media coverage. And later, 2017, they've done some interviews since. Lyle Menendez said, "It's shocking to think that I could have been involved in taking anyone's life and my parents' life. It seems unimaginable because it seems so far removed from who I am. I am the kid that did kill his parents, and no river of tears has changed that, and no amount of regret has changed it. I accept it. You are often defined by a few moments of your life. That's not who you are in your life, you know. Your life is the totality of it. You can't change it. You're just stuck with the decisions you've made. My life is a struggle not to be defined by what happened," Lyle says. "I'm at peace with my life growing up. I'm at peace with it because I've just sort of accepted that it's okay to not understand.
I mean, okay.
Okay.
He's kind of like, he's acting like he's, you know, like come to terms with it. He's at, like, dude, you're in jail the rest of your life. Like, no shit, you're at peace with it. There's no way of not being at peace with it. That's like,
what else
you're in
can you
four
do?
walls. Yeah, like this guy's acting like he's being super like introspective and like taking the high road. It's like, dude, you're literally in jail.
And this is gaining a lot of popularity again because last year the Menendez brothers actually went viral on TikTok. It started out with a lot of girls, like, you know that Britney Spears song that goes, "Mama, I'm in love with a criminal." So people would make fan edits with that song because the boys are very attractive. And I just have to say that's horrible. But that began a discussion on TikTok when girls are like, wait, who are these people? And they get interested in the case. They listen to their testimony and they're really convinced by them. And they're outraged at their conviction and how they were treated in the media. So these videos just have so many views. I can't even talk about it because it's so crazy. There's 173 million views on videos that these 12 and 13 and 14-year-old girls are making trying to free the Menendez brothers. And honestly, it's extremely...
This is why 12 and 13 and 14-year-old girls shouldn't be on TikTok.
Hey, I was obsessed with weird, dark things when I was 12, too. This is not the first that this has happened. I remember when I was on Tumblr way too young, there were girls who were obsessed with the Columbine shooters and, like, Ted Bundy. Some people think Ted Bundy is attractive. Like, there's always that weird section. That's not what I'm talking about here. It's pretty impressive, actually, though, to see them have this extremely organized movement and talking very eloquently and intelligently using a lot of legal jargon. Like, they really understand, like, the nuances of what's going on in this case. And I just think that preteen and teen girls are dark and mysterious and powerful. But stop making the thirst traps. We don't need to do that.
Okay.
That's unnecessary. I don't know. I think in our concluding talk about this, I think the most important takeaways for me, at least, is like, you have to think about where America was at the time. This is the first nationally televised trial, and it's the first time that we can watch every movement and judge every facial expression that someone makes when they're on the stand, and that can't be understated, that the impact that that's going to have. And it also involved child sexual abuse, and no one wants to believe that a parent would harm their child like that, especially in the 90s, and especially because they're young boys and it was their father who was molesting them. And the monies and the burglaries and all of these things just made it easier, in my opinion. I think all of these things, it was just too much for people to process, that it was easier for the majority of people to believe the spoiled rich kids, they're just making it up narrative. And the way that, like, SNL and the media made fun of sexual abuse was horrible, and the way they were treated by the media and the public was objectively nasty. But the crime was also horrible, and what they did to their parents was also objectively wrong, obviously, and so horrible. And I think, I don't know, the world is complicated and both can be true.
Yeah, I think it's like brings up, like you're saying, I think it just brings up more like philosophical questions of like, how can we justify things? You know, like, it's like we had 2 lives lost, but like, are the value of these 2 lives weighed higher than the value of these 2 lives and like the safety of them? And I think that's a moral issue that like we're still, I mean, that's like the whole centering around the death penalty, like the whole argument and debate around that is like, what is the value of a human life? And like, can we just like strip that away from someone? So,
and like now we're just, I think we're more primed to talk about sexual abuse than the country was 30 years ago. Like, we've had like Bill Cosby and the Catholic sexual abuse scandal and Jeffrey Epstein. Like, we've talked a lot about sexual abuse and childhood sexual abuse So especially these young kids who are on TikTok, looking back at the way we talked about it then, they're horrified. We're just more likely to tread a little bit more lightly around these topics. And I think it's okay to look back and think
Yeah.
at the way we talked about those things and say the way this unfolded was wrong and the story might have been more complicated than we thought at first. But still, like I said, a lot of people get abused and don't kill anyone. At the end of the day, they did kill their parents.
Yeah. I think, that's just what makes the topic of sexual abuse so difficult, because it is so personal, and it's really difficult to say, like, hey, this person should have done this, or you should have handled this in a better way. It's like impossible to look someone in the eyes and say that. So
that was the
God.
Menendez Brothers murder case. What a ride.
Yeah, that was a roller coaster. Well, not even a roller coaster. I mean, I feel like the turn for me really was obviously the sexual abuse allegations, but what an interesting and like pivotal moment in time in our history. And it's around these two run-of-the-mill rich kids. Gotta love it. Yeah, thanks for tuning in with us. And Mary Margret, thanks for, as always, giving me a great rundown. And don't forget to hit the like button, follow, subscribe, keep up with us, stay in the loop, and be notified when we are posting again next week.